Welcome to Grandma's Tales. I am so happy you are here with me, tucked in and ready for a journey. Tonight, we are going to visit a very strange and wonderful place. A place where the flowers whisper secrets and the clocks tick in a rhythm of joy. It is a garden where anything can happen, and where even a tiny cup of tea can lead to a grand adventure of the heart. Take a deep breath, little one. Feel your shoulders relax, and let your head sink into the soft pillow. Let us follow a curious girl named Alice into the heart of Wonderland, to a party where everyone is invited and every moment is filled with golden light. Alice had been walking for a long time through the woods of Wonderland. These were not like the woods at home. Here, the trees had bark that felt like soft suede, and their leaves shimmered like polished emeralds in the eternal afternoon sun. The path beneath her feet was not made of dirt, but of a moss so thick and velvet-like that her footsteps made no sound at all. Alice was a curious girl, with a heart full of questions and eyes that always looked for the magic hidden in the shadows. As she turned a corner near a large, spreading oak tree, a tree whose branches seemed to reach out like welcoming arms, she saw a house that made her stop and smile. It was a house that looked quite unusual indeed. It had chimneys shaped like long, tufted ears, and a roof made of felt that looked like a giant, elegant hat. The air around the house smelled of wild honey and toasted cinnamon. In front of the house, under the wide, cool shade of the great oak, a long table was set out. It seemed to stretch on forever, disappearing into the soft haze of the garden. The table was covered in a tablecloth of fine white lace, so intricate that it looked like it had been woven by spiders out of moonlight. Thousands of tiny golden dust particles danced in the shafts of light that broke through the leaves above. Alice watched them, fascinated. They looked like tiny glowing stars that had fallen to earth just to join the party. Everything was still, yet full of life, as if the garden itself was holding its breath in anticipation of a beautiful story. The table was set with hundreds, no, thousands of teacups. Alice walked closer, her eyes wide with wonder. Each cup was a work of art. Some were as small as a thimble, painted with tiny, delicate bluebells that seemed to sway in a phantom breeze. Others were as large as soup bowls, heavy and grand, decorated with golden swirls that caught the light and reflected it back in a warm, amber glow. There were silver teapots that looked like sleeping swans, crystal sugar bowls that sparkled like diamonds, and plates piled high with scones. These scones were golden brown, smelling of warm butter and the sweetest strawberry jam you can imagine. In the center of the table stood a tall, tiered stand filled with cakes that glowed with a faint, magical light of their own. At one corner of this vast, shimmering table sat the March Hare and the Mad Hatter. The hare had long, soft ears decorated with small daisies, and the Hatter wore a hat so tall and magnificent it looked like a tower made of silk. Between them sat a small grey dormouse, He was fast asleep, his tiny paws tucked under his chin, using the shoulders of his friends as soft cushions. They looked peaceful there, 3 friends sharing a moment in the golden hour. Alice approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. Even though the table was enormous, the 3 of them were all crowded together at one end, as if they enjoyed being close to one another in this wide, magical world. And they saw Alice approaching. The March Hare and the Mad Hatter cried out, "No room! No room!" But they didn't say it with anger. They said it with a sort of musical playfulness, like a game they had played many times before. Alice looked at the many empty chairs, each carved from dark, polished wood and upholstered in velvet. She smiled gently and replied that there was, in fact, plenty of room. She sat down in a large, comfortable armchair at the head of the table. It felt like being hugged by a soft cloud. She adjusted the ribbons in her hair and looked at her hosts with bright, interested eyes. She wasn't frightened by their strange clothes or their loud voices. She was simply enchanted by the mystery of them. The Mad Hatter looked at Alice with eyes that were very large and filled with a kind of sparkling intelligence. He didn't look mean. He looked like someone who had spent his whole life dreaming. He leaned forward, his tall hat tilting slightly to one side. He didn't ask her name or where she came from. Instead, he asked her a riddle. Why is a raven like a writing desk? Alice rested her chin on her hand, thinking deeply. She watched a small, sapphire-coloured bird hop across the lace tablecloth, picking up a stray crumb of cake. The riddle wasn't a test. It was an invitation to think about the world in a new way, where logic was less important than wonder. The March Hare offered Alice some tea with a grand, sweeping gesture. But when Alice looked at the beautiful pots and cups, she saw they were all empty. "There isn't any tea," the hare admitted with a soft, bashful smile. Alice didn't get frustrated. In Wonderland, she was learning that the idea of a thing could be just as wonderful as the thing itself. She realized they weren't being rude. They were simply living in a world made of imagination. "It wasn't very civil of you to offer it," Alice said, but her voice was light and teasing. They all laughed together, a sound like silver bells ringing in the woods. The empty cups represented a world of infinite possibilities. You could imagine them filled with anything you desired. The conversation turned to something very special. Time. The Mad Hatter whispered, his voice dropping to a respectful hush, that time was not a thing, but a person. A dear friend who lived in the heartbeat of the world. He told Alice that he had once had a small disagreement with time, and since then, time had kindly allowed it to be tea time forever at this table. Alice looked at the golden sun, which stayed perfectly still just above the horizon. The shadows were long and soft, the colour of lavender and honey. She thought about what it would be like to live in the golden hour forever. It felt like the moment just before you fall into a happy dream, warm, safe, and eternal. She watched the dormouse wake up for a brief moment. He blinked his tiny, bead-like eyes and began to tell a story in a soft, squeaky voice. It was a story about 3 sisters who lived at the bottom of a well filled with treacle. The treacle, he explained, was sweet and thick and golden. Alice could almost taste the sweetness in the air. The leaves of the oak tree rustled above them, a sound like 1,000 tiny silk fans. The garden was a symphony of soft noises. The clink of a silver spoon against porcelain, the hum of a distant bee, and the gentle breathing of the sleeping mouse. Everything felt perfectly in its place, a masterpiece of peace. As the afternoon stretched on, the Mad Hatter suggested they all move 1 seat to the right. "Since we have no time to wash the cups," he explained, "we simply move to a fresh one." Alice stood up and moved to the next chair. This one was covered in emerald green velvet. She noticed that as they moved around the table, the cups became even more beautiful. She found one that was made of translucent sea glass, glowing with a soft inner light. Another was shaped like a blooming lily, its petals curling perfectly to hold a phantom drink. Alice began to enjoy the rhythm of it all. The movement, the laughter, the shifting perspective. She realized that life didn't always have to go in a straight line. Sometimes, moving in a circle with friends was the most wonderful journey of all. Alice reached out and touched a teapot. It was warm, as if it were basking in the sun. She noticed tiny carvings on its side, scenes of little mice dancing under a harvest moon. The Mad Hatter took out his pocket watch, which was made of solid gold and encrusted with pearls. He shook it gently and sighed, saying it was 2 days slow. He then did something very strange. He dipped the watch into a cup of tea. Alice didn't scold him. She didn't tell him he was being silly. Instead, she asked him if the watch told him the year. The Hatter shook his head, his eyes soft. "The year is far too slow for a watch to keep track of," he said. Alice nodded, understanding that here, a single second of joy was worth more than 100 years of boredom. She felt a deep sense of calm washing over her. The world Alice came from was full of rules, dusty books, and lessons that had to be memorized. But here, in the shadow of the ears-shaped chimneys, she was allowed to just be. She realized that her imagination was a superpower. If she imagined the cup was full of hot, sweet cocoa with melting marshmallows, she could almost feel the warmth in her hands. She understood that the Hatter and the Hare weren't mad. They were simply free. They were keepers of the golden afternoon, guardians of the magic that most people forget as they grow up. The March Hare began to sing a song. It wasn't a song with many words, but it had a melody that sounded like the wind through the pines. The Dormouse mumble-sang along in his sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in time with the music. Alice looked up through the branches of the oak tree. The sky was a deep, brilliant turquoise, and the clouds were like tufts of spun sugar. She felt very lucky. She was a guest at the most exclusive party in the world, a party where the only requirement was to believe in the impossible. She saw a butterfly with wings like stained glass land on the edge of her cup, and she held her breath, not wanting to break the spell of the moment. The Alice thought about her sister back on the riverbank and her cat, Dinah. She knew they were waiting for her, but she also knew that they were part of this magic too. She realized that everyone she met in Wonderland was a mirror, showing her a different part of her own heart. The Hatter showed her her creativity, the Hare showed her her playfulness, and the Dormouse showed her her need for rest and dreams. She felt a profound connection to the garden and the strange people in it. The table wasn't just a place for tea. It was a place where stories were born and where time stood still to let those stories grow. Eventually the sun began to dip just a fraction lower, turning the garden into a world of molten gold. Alice knew it was time to continue her journey. She stood up slowly, her velvet chair making a soft hush sound on the moss. She looked at her friends. The Hatter was adjusting his tie, and the Hare was carefully polishing a silver spoon. "Thank you," Alice said, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "This was the most interesting tea party I have ever attended." The Hatter looked up and tipped his magnificent hat. He didn't say goodbye. He simply said, "Remember, Alice, the stars are always there, even when you can't see them." As Alice walked away, she looked back one last time. She saw the three of them, the Hatter, the Hare, and the Dormouse, all leaning against each other under the great oak tree. They looked like a beautiful painting, a tableau of friendship and peace. She laughed softly to herself, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. The smell of the buttered scones followed her like a sweet memory, and the sight of the glittering teacups stayed behind her eyes like a constellation of stars. She felt lighter, as if she could almost float over the mossy ground. She walked back into the woods, but the forest felt different now. The trees seemed to lean in to hear her thoughts, and the shadows were no longer mysterious, but cozy and protective. She realized she was carrying a piece of the tea party inside her. She understood that she didn't need to explain Wonderland to anyone, not even to herself. Some things are meant to be felt, not understood. She felt brave, curious, and incredibly wise for her age. She was Alice, the girl who had tea with time, and she knew that no matter where she went, she would always have a seat at that golden table. The path ahead of her glowed with a soft, guiding light. Alice knew that her adventure was far from over, but she also knew that she was safe. Wonderland was not a place of danger, but a place of discovery. She thought of the Mad Hatter's riddle one last time and realized the answer didn't matter. What mattered was the smile it put on her face. She felt a deep, happy end in her soul, a knowledge that everything was exactly as it should be. The world was a vast, beautiful garden, and she was its most honored guest. Alice learned that a little bit of nonsense is like a splash of color on a grey day. She learned that our minds are vast gardens where we can have a tea party whenever we wish, simply by closing our eyes and imagining the scent of jam and the sound of laughter. And so she travelled on, her heart light and her spirit free. The end. For more audiobooks for preschoolers or 3-year-olds, stay on our channel. Your eyes are closing now, and your breath is slow and deep. Dream of golden afternoons, teacups painted with stars, and a table that never ends. Good night, little one. Sleep in the light of the golden sun. Welcome to Grandma's Tales. Tonight, we visit a house made entirely of gingerbread and magic. This is a gentle version of the classic story, specially crafted to be calm and safe for your little one's bedtime. No scary moments, just the sweet smell of cookies and a wonderful adventure. Close your eyes and let's find the candy house hidden in the woods. Once upon a time, at the very edge of a forest so vast that the trees seemed to touch the stars, lived a woodcutter, his wife, and their 2 children, Hansel and Gretel. Their small house was filled with the scent of pine needles and wood smoke. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and their home was filled with the sound of laughter. One evening, as the moon rose like a silver coin over the hills, Hansel and Gretel sat by the hearth. They saw that their parents looked tired from their hard work. Hansel, who always tried to be the leader, whispered to his sister that they should find a way to bring a little bit of magic back to their home, something sweet to make their parents smile. Gretel looked at her brother, her eyes reflecting the flickering orange light of the fire. She felt a little flutter of worry in her chest. "Hansel," she whispered, "the forest is very big at night, and the shadows look like tall giants. Are you sure we should go so far?" Hansel took her hand. His own palm was a bit sweaty, but he stood up straight and gave her a small, confident smile. "Don't worry, Gretel. I will be right here beside you. I am not afraid of shadows, and besides, the moon will light our way like a giant lantern." He was pretending to be much braver than he felt, but seeing the way Gretel started to relax made him feel stronger. He wanted to be the shield that kept the world quiet and safe for his sister. The next morning, as the sun began to paint the dew in shades of gold, the 2 children decided to walk a little deeper into the forest. Hansel filled his pockets with small white pebbles from the garden path. Every time Gretel stopped because she heard a strange bird call or the rustle of a leaf, Hansel would drop a pebble and say, "See? We are making a trail of stars on the ground. We can never be lost as long as we have our path." Gretel watched him, admiring his courage, and she decided to be brave too. She started to look for the beauty in the moss and the way the sunlight danced through the ferns, instead of looking for what might be hiding in the dark. The forest was a quiet and beautiful place. They saw squirrels with tails as fluffy as clouds and birds with feathers the colour of sapphires. They walked for a long time, and the air began to change. It didn't smell like damp earth or pine anymore. It was replaced by something magical, a smell so sweet it made their noses tingle. It was the scent of baked cinnamon, melted chocolate, and spun sugar. Hansel and Gretel followed the delicious trail, their hearts beating with excitement. They pushed through a thicket of lilac bushes, and there, in the middle of a sun-drenched clearing, stood the most incredible house they had ever seen. It was a house made entirely of gingerbread. The walls were thick and brown, smelling of the finest spices. The roof was covered in tiles of pink and white icing, looking like soft, sweet snow. The windows were made of clear amber sugar that sparkled like diamonds in the afternoon light. Around the door, there were pillars of peppermint sticks, swirled with red and white, and the doorstep was a giant slab of dark, rich fudge. Even the garden was magical. The flowers were lollipops of every colour, and the path was paved with small, colourful jelly beans. Gretel gasped, reaching out to touch a sugar leaf. "Hansel, is it real?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Hansel nodded, though he was looking around carefully, his protective instincts still sharp. "It looks like a dream, Gretel. But remember, we must be polite. We shouldn't eat someone's house without asking." But just then, a small piece of the windowsill, made of almond brittle, fell off. Hansel caught it and gave half to Gretel. They tasted it, and it was the most delicious thing they had ever eaten. It tasted like warmth and Sunday mornings. Suddenly, the peppermint door creaked open, and a lady stepped out. Gretel stepped back, hiding slightly behind Hansel's shoulder. Hansel stood his ground, chin held high, though he gripped his sister's hand a little tighter. The lady didn't look scary at all. She wore a dress the colour of caramel and a tall hat that looked like a cupcake. She was the candy keeper. She looked at the children and sighed a long, lonely sigh. "Oh," she said, her voice like the rustle of silk, "I haven't had visitors in such a long time. Please, come in. My house is made of sugar, but it has been very quiet." Inside, the house was a marvel of confectionery engineering. Hansel looked at the chocolate chairs and wondered if they would melt if he sat on them too long. The candy keeper noticed his worry and laughed. "Don't worry, little brave one. These chairs are enchanted to stay cool and firm." Gretel was fascinated by the lamps, which were giant lemon drops that cast a soft yellow glow over everything. The kitchen was the most active part of the house. Spoons were stirring bowls of blue frosting all by themselves, and a rolling pin was dancing across a sheet of dough. The candy keeper asked them for help. She told them she was preparing for the great forest feast, but was too tired to do it all alone. Gretel's fear vanished instantly. She loved to help, especially in a kitchen that smelled like a dream. She began to organize the jars of silver sprinkles and golden honey. Hansel, seeing that his sister was happy and safe, decided to help with the heavier work. He helped the candy keeper gather enchanted wood for the stove, wood that didn't smoke, but instead gave off the scent of roasting hazelnuts. As the days passed in the gingerbread house, the atmosphere changed. It wasn't just a house made of candy anymore. It was becoming a home. Hansel and Gretel talked to the candy keeper about their life at the edge of the woods. They told her about the woodcutters' stories and the way their mother sang to them. The candy keeper listened with tears in her eyes. She had been so focused on making her house perfect and sweet that she had forgotten that life needs more than just sugar. It needs stories. It needs shared laughter. Gretel noticed that the candy keeper's hands were sometimes shaky when she reached for a jar of cinnamon. She went to her and placed her small hand on the lady's arm. "You don't have to do everything perfectly," Gretel said softly. "We like it here just because you are here." Hansel, seeing this, realized that being brave wasn't just about facing giants or finding paths. It was also about being kind and making someone feel less alone. He started to tell funny stories to make the candy keeper laugh, and soon the kitchen was filled with the brightest sound in the world. One evening, while the wind was singing a soft lullaby through the sugar-coated eaves, Hansel looked out the window. He saw the dark line of the forest in the distance and thought of his parents. He felt a pang of homesickness, a heavy feeling in his stomach. Gretel saw his face and came to sit beside him. "Are you sad, Hansel?" she asked. Hansel shook his head quickly, trying to stay the brave brother she expected. "No, Gretel, I'm just thinking." But his voice was a bit smaller than usual. Gretel smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "It's okay to miss home, Hansel, even for a brave boy." The candy keeper heard them and realized it was time for the children to return. She couldn't keep them in her sugar world forever. She knew that the greatest gift she could give them wasn't a piece of her house, but the happiness of their family. She began to prepare 2 special baskets, the most beautiful ones she had ever made, woven from vines of sweet strawberry licorice. She filled the baskets with gifts that would last a lifetime. There were jars of never-ending honey, which would provide sweetness for their parents every morning. There were loaves of bread that tasted of moonlight and strength, and most importantly, she gave them a small, glowing crystal made of pure rock candy. "This," she said, "is a beacon. Whenever you feel lonely or tired, hold it, and you will remember that you have a friend in the heart of the forest." The journey back was different from the journey there. Hansel didn't need to drop pebbles, and Gretel didn't need to look for giants in the shadows. The candy keeper walked with them, her caramel dress flowing like a river. The forest seemed to welcome them back. The owls hooted a gentle greeting, and the moon stayed bright and clear, showing them every turn of the path. Hansel walked with his chest out, carrying the heavy baskets, still playing the role of the protector, but now he did it with a genuine smile. When they reached the woodcutter's cottage, the light was still burning in the window. Their parents were sitting on the porch, looking into the darkness with hope in their hearts. When they saw the children, they ran to them with such joy that even the trees seemed to shiver with happiness. The reunion was long and full of hugs. The candy keeper stood back, watching the family, and felt her own heart fill with a sweetness that no candy could ever match. She realized that the magic of the gingerbread house was now inside her. The woodcutter and his wife thanked the lady again and again. They invited her into their simple home, and though it wasn't made of gingerbread or chocolate, the candy keeper felt that it was the most beautiful place she had ever been. They shared the treats from the baskets, and the woodcutter felt his strength return, and the wife felt her heart grow light. Hansel sat by the fire, finally letting his shoulders drop. He looked at Gretel and whispered, "See, I told you it would be an adventure." Gretel laughed and kissed his cheek. "You were very brave, Hansel, even the parts you were pretending." From that night on, the family and the candy keeper were never lonely again. They visited the gingerbread house every week, and the children helped keep the sugar windows clean and the icing roof bright. The forest was no longer a place of mystery or fear, but a place of friendship and shared recipes. Hansel grew up to be a man of great courage, but he always remembered that being brave also meant being tender. Gretel became a storyteller, telling everyone about the lady in the caramel dress and the house that smelled like cinnamon. They learned that the sweetest things in life are not the ones we eat, but the moments we spend making others feel loved. The woodcutter's cottage and the gingerbread house became like two hearts beating together in the valley, connected by a path that was always open and always safe. And whenever a child in the village felt afraid of the dark, Hansel or Gretel would tell them the story of the pebbles and the sugar windows, and the fear would melt away like chocolate in the sun. Hansel and Gretel found that the best magic is the magic we share with others. The end. For more audiobooks for preschoolers or 3-year-olds, stay on our channel. Your little eyes are getting very heavy now. Imagine you are lying on a bed of soft marshmallows under a blanket of spun sugar. Sleep well, little one, and dream of gingerbread houses. Good night. Welcome to Grandma's Tales. I am so glad you are here with me today. Put away your toys, find your favorite blanket, and get very, very cozy. Today, I have a special story for you about a little friend made of ginger and spice. It is a story about running, but also about learning when to stop and listen. Close your eyes now, and let's go to a little cottage at the edge of a golden wheat field. Deep in the heart of a quiet valley, where the wind whispers through the willow trees and the brook sings a silver song, there stood a small cottage. This cottage had a roof made of thick, sun-dried straw and walls the colour of toasted oats. It was a place where time seemed to move more slowly, and where the air always smelled of wood smoke and dried lavender. Inside this cottage lived a kind old lady and a kind old man. They had lived there for many, many years, tending to their small garden and watching the clouds drift lazily across the vast blue sky. The old lady was known for her kitchen, which was the heart of their home. It was a warm place, with copper pots hanging from the walls, and a large, heavy table made of oak that had seen 1,000 meals. One afternoon, when the rain was pattering softly on the window pane, a gentle, rhythmic sound that made everything feel even more tucked in and safe, the old lady decided it was a perfect day for baking. She pulled out her large wooden bowl, the one with the smooth, worn edges, and began to gather her ingredients with great care. She believed that baking was a form of magic, and that a peaceful heart was the most important ingredient of all. She measured out the flour, which was as white and soft as a summer cloud. She added a pinch of salt and a large spoonful of dark, rich molasses that looked like liquid silk as it swirled into the bowl. Then came the ginger, the most important part. It was a warm, fragrant spice that immediately made the whole kitchen feel like a giant, comfortable hug. She added cinnamon and cloves, and as she stirred the thick dough, she sang a low, humming tune. The old man sat in his rocking chair by the fire, his eyes closed, nodding his head to the rhythm of her song. They were very happy in their quiet life, but sometimes, when the evening shadows grew long, they wished for a little more life and laughter in their silent home. When the dough was firm and smooth, the old lady rolled it out on her floured table. She decided to make something she had never made before, a little man. She worked slowly, shaping his torso, his 2 sturdy legs for walking, and 2 little arms for waving. For his eyes, she searched through her jar of dried fruits and chose 2 plump, dark raisins that looked like tiny, twinkling stars. For his mouth, she used a tiny sliver of lemon peel, curved into a permanent, gentle smile. Finally, she gave him 3 little buttons down his chest, made of sweet, rose-pink icing. He was the most handsome gingerbread man she had ever seen, and she felt a surge of pride as she looked at him. She placed him carefully on a greased baking tray and slid him into the warm, glowing oven. The kitchen soon began to fill with a scent so wonderful it could make anyone feel at home. It smelled of holidays, of cozy blankets, and of sweet, hidden surprises. The old lady and the old man waited together, sitting side by side, listening to the wood in the fireplace pop and crackle. They talked about their garden and the birds that visited their feeder, unaware that the little man in the oven was listening to every word, and that his little ginger heart was starting to beat with a magic of its own. Suddenly, a tiny sound came from behind the oven door. A little tap, 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 like a bird pecking at a window. The old lady stood up, her eyes wide with surprise. She opened the oven door just a crack, and to her amazement, out hopped the gingerbread man. He didn't look like a cookie anymore. He moved with the grace of a little dancer, light and nimble. He skipped across the kitchen floor, his icing buttons shining in the firelight like jewels. The old man reached out his hands to catch him, hoping to keep this little miracle in their home. But the little man was far too quick. He giggled, a sound like silver bells ringing in the wind, and ran straight out the open door, past the sleeping cat, and into the wide green garden. The garden was a world of wonders. The grass was tall and soft, and the flowers were just beginning to close their petals for the night. The gingerbread man felt the cool earth beneath his feet and the fresh evening air on his face for the very first time. He was so excited to be alive, so full of energy, that he didn't want to stop for even a second. He ran past the vegetable patch where the pumpkins were growing round and orange. He ran past the old stone well where the moss grew thick and green. The old lady and the old man followed him as fast as they could, their hearts thumping, calling out for him to wait, to come back to the warmth of the kitchen. But the little man was caught up in the magic of his own speed. He turned his head, his raisin eyes sparkling, and sang out his song in a voice that was soft and sweet, like a lullaby. Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. He reached the edge of the great wheat field, where the stalks were tall and golden, waving in the evening breeze like a sea of honey. As he ran along the narrow dirt path, he encountered a big, gentle cow. The cow was chewing slowly on a patch of sweet clover and looked at the little man with large, dark, curious eyes. The cow mooed softly, a low and grounding sound, asking the gingerbread man where he was going in such a great hurry when the stars were about to come out. But the little man just laughed, his little legs moving like a blur. He told the cow that he had run away from the old lady and the old man, and he could certainly run away from a big, slow cow, too. The cow watched him go, shaking her head slowly, wondering why anyone would want to run away from such a beautiful, peaceful place. A little further down the path, near a cluster of ancient oak trees whose branches reached up like long fingers towards the sky, he met a sheep. The sheep had a coat of wool so thick and white it looked like a fallen cloud. She was resting near a hedge, her ears twitching at every sound. She called out to the gingerbread man, her voice soft and shaky, telling him that the path ahead was long and that he should stay a while to rest his feet. But the gingerbread man felt invincible. He felt as though he could run forever, all the way to the edge of the world. He sang his song again, his voice echoing through the quiet woods, and the sheep sighed, settling back into the grass as the little man disappeared into the twilight. The path led him deeper into the valley, past a stable where a horse was resting. The horse was strong and tall, with a coat as dark as midnight, and eyes that seemed to hold a lot of wisdom. He flicked his mane as the gingerbread man scurried by, his tiny footsteps making a patter-patter sound on the dry leaves. The horse wondered why such a small creature was in such a rush to leave behind the safety of the farms and fields. Again, the gingerbread man sang his song. He felt very proud, thinking that speed was the only thing that mattered. He didn't realize that the world is much larger than a kitchen or a garden, and that even the fastest legs eventually grow tired when the road becomes steep and the night grows cold. The sun had now dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky of deep violet and soft indigo. The shadows grew long and heavy, stretching across the path like quiet, friendly giants. The air grew cooler, and the scent of the damp earth became stronger. Finally, the gingerbread man reached a place where the path simply ended. Before him lay a wide, deep river. The water was dark and moved with a heavy, steady rhythm, making a sound like swish, wash, swish against the muddy banks. The little man stopped. He looked at his ginger hands and his ginger feet. He knew that he was made of sugar and spice and flour, and if he stepped into the cold, moving water, he would become soft and crumble away until there was nothing left of him. He looked to the left, and he looked to the right, but there was no bridge to be seen, and the river was far too wide to jump. That was when he noticed a shadow moving near a pile of mossy stones. It was a fox. The fox had fur the colour of autumn leaves and a tail with a beautiful white tip. He didn't growl, and he didn't move toward the gingerbread man. He stayed perfectly still, his eyes reflecting the first few stars of the night. When he spoke, his voice was as smooth as silk and as warm as a summer evening. The fox told the little man that he had been watching him run, and that he was very impressed by his speed. But, the fox added, even the fastest runner needs a way across the water. He offered to help, saying he had no wish to catch the little man, but only to see him safely to the other side, where the meadows were even greener and the flowers stayed open all night. The gingerbread man was hesitant, but the fox's eyes were calm and steady, like the eyes of a grandmother who knows many secrets. He didn't look hungry. He looked like someone who enjoyed a good story and a quiet walk. After a moment of thought, the gingerbread man climbed onto the fox's thick, bushy tail. As they entered the water, the fox began to swim with long, easy strokes. The water was cold and dark, but the gingerbread man felt safe and high above the ripples. He watched the reflection of the moon dancing on the surface of the river and felt a sense of peace he hadn't known while he was running. As they reached the middle of the river, where the water was deepest and the current was at its strongest, the fox spoke again. He suggested that the gingerbread man move up to his back so his feet wouldn't get wet. A moment later, he suggested moving to his neck, and finally, right onto the very tip of his black, wet nose. The gingerbread man did as he was told, trusting the fox completely. He felt like the king of the forest, perched so high, looking out at the far bank. He thought about how far he had come from the little kitchen, and how clever he was to have found such a helpful companion. He was so caught up in his own success that he almost forgot to be careful. But as the fox's paws touched the soft sand of the opposite bank, something unexpected happened. The fox didn't toss the gingerbread man into the air. He didn't open his mouth to eat him. Instead, he walked slowly onto the soft grass, well away from the water, and lowered his head very gently. He waited until the gingerbread man hopped down safely onto a bed of soft, emerald green moss. The fox looked at him with a knowing smile and said that while being fast is a wonderful thing, knowing when to trust someone and how to say thank you is what truly makes a person wise. The gingerbread man looked back across the wide river. In the distance, he could see the lanterns of the old lady and the old man, who were still standing on the other bank, watching over him. He realized then that he didn't need to run anymore. He didn't need to prove how fast he was. He invited the fox to sit with him under the light of the full moon. They spent the night talking about the magic of the forest and the sweetness of the ginger fields. The gingerbread man realized that the world was not a place to run through, but a place to live in, and that every step should be taken with care and gratitude. He promised that he would always be a friend to the animals of the valley, and that he would never forget the kindness of the fox who had helped him find his way. And so, the gingerbread man lived a long and happy life in the heart of the forest, where the air is always sweet and the stars always shine bright. He learned that the most important journey isn't about how fast your legs can carry you, but about the love you carry in your heart and the friends you make along the way. He was no longer a runaway, but a cherished part of the woods, a tiny friend to every creature great and small. The end. For more audiobooks for preschoolers or 3-year-olds, stay on our channel. Your little eyes are getting very heavy now, and the world is quiet and still. Sleep well, little one, and dream of sweet adventures. Good night.